I'm going to be reading some excerpts from Bartleby the Scrivener by Herman Melville. This is narrated by an elderly lawyer who happens to hire a very strange young scrivener by the name of Bartleby. A scrivener is a law copyist, or think human Xerox machine in the 19th century. At first, Bartleby did an extraordinary quantity of writing, as if long famished for something to copy. He seemed to gorge himself on my documents. There was no pause for digestion. He ran a day and a night line, copying by sunlight and by candlelight. I should have been quite delighted with his application had he been cheerfully industrious, but he wrote on silently, palely, mechanically. Now and then, in the haste of business, it had been my habit to assist in comparing some brief document myself, calling Turkey or Nippers for this purpose, my other scriveners. One object I had in placing Bartleby so handy to me behind the screen was to avail myself of his services on such trivial occasions. It was on the third day, I think, that I abruptly called to Bartleby. In my haste and natural expectancy of instant compliance, I sat with my head bent over my original on my desk, and my right hand sideways and somewhat nervously extended with the copy, so that, immediately upon emerging from his retreat, Bartleby might snatch it and proceed to business without the least delay. In this very attitude did I sit when I called to him, rapidly stating what it was I wanted him to do, namely to examine a small paper with me. Imagine my surprise, nay, my consternation, when, without moving from his privacy, Bartleby, in a singularly mild, firm voice, replied, "I would prefer not to." I sat a while in perfect silence, rallying my stunned faculties. Immediately it occurred to me that my ears had deceived me, or that Bartleby had entirely misunderstood my meaning. I repeated my request. "I would prefer not to." "Prefer not to?" echoed I, rising in high excitement and crossing the room with a stride. "What do you mean? Are you moonstruck? I want you to help me compare this sheet here. Take it." And I thrust it towards him. "I would prefer not to," said he. I looked at him steadfastly. His face was leanly composed, his gray eyes dimly calm. Not a wrinkle of agitation rippled him. Had there been the least uneasiness, anger, impatience, or impertinence in his manner, in other words, had there been anything ordinarily human about him, doubtless I should have violently dismissed him from the premises. I stood gazing at him a while as he went on with his own writing, and then reseated myself at my desk. This is very strange, thought I, but my business hurried me. I concluded to forget the matter for the present, reserving it for my future leisure. So, calling Nippers from the other room, the paper was speedily examined. A few days after this, Bartleby concluded 4 lengthy documents, being quadruplicates of a week's testimony taken before me in my High Court of Chancery. It became necessary to examine them. It was an important suit, and great accuracy was imperative. Having all things arranged, I called Turkey, Nippers, and Gingernut from the next room, meaning to place the 4 copies in the hands of my 4 clerks while I read from the original. Accordingly, Turkey, Nippers, and Gingernut had taken their seats in a row, each with his document in his hand, when I called to Bartleby to join this interesting group. "Bartleby, quick! I am waiting." I heard a slow scrape of the chair legs on the uncarpeted floor, and soon he appeared standing at the entrance of his hermitage. "What is wanted?" said he mildly. The copies, said I hurriedly. "We are going to examine them. There." And I held towards him the 4th quadruplicate. "I would prefer not to," said he, and gently disappeared behind the screen. For a few moments I was turned into a pillar of salt, standing at the head of my seated column of clerks. Recovering myself, I advanced towards the screen and demanded the reason for such extraordinary conduct. "Why do you refuse?" I prefer not to. With any other man, I should have flown outright into a dreadful passion, scorned all further words, and thrust him ignominiously from my presence. But there was something about Bartleby that not only strangely disarmed me, but in a wonderful manner touched and disconcerted me. I began to reason with him. These are your own documents we are about to examine. It is labor-saving to you, because one examination will answer for your 4 papers. It is common usage. Every copyist is bound to help examine his copy. Is it not so? Will you not speak? Answer! I prefer not to, he replied in a flute-like tone. It seemed to me that while I had been addressing him, he carefully revolved every statement that I made, fully comprehended the meaning, could not gainsay the irresistible conclusion, but at the same time some paramount consideration prevailed within him to reply as he did. You are decided, then, not to comply with my request, a request made according to common usage and common sense? He briefly gave me to understand that on that point my judgment was sound. Yes, his decision was irreversible. Some days passed, and the Scrivener, being employed upon other lengthy work, his late remarkable conduct led me to regard his ways narrowly. I observed that he never went to dinner, indeed, that he never went anywhere. As yet, I had never, of my personal knowledge, known him to be outside my office. He was a perpetual sentry in the corner. At about 11 o'clock, though, in the morning, I noticed that Gingernut would advance towards the opening in Bartleby's screen, as if silently beckoned thither by a gesture invisible to me where I sat. The boy would then leave the office jingling with a few pence and reappear with a handful of ginger nuts, which he delivered into the hermitage, receiving 2 of the cakes for his trouble. Bartleby, said I, when those papers are all copied, I will compare them with you. I would prefer not to. How? Surely you do not mean to persist in that mulish vagary. No answer. I threw open the folding doors nearby and, turning upon Turkey and Nippers, exclaimed, Bartleby a second time says he won't compare his papers. What do you think of it, Turkey? Think of it, roared Turkey. I think I'll just step behind that screen and black his eyes for him. Sit down, Turkey, said I, and hear what Nippers has to say. What do you think of it, Nippers? Would I not be justified in immediately dismissing Bartleby? Excuse me, sir, that is for you to decide. I think his conduct is quite unusual and indeed unjust. As regards Turkey and myself, maybe it's only a passing whim. Ah, exclaimed I, you have strangely changed your mind. You speak very gently of him now. Oh, beer, cried Turkey. Gentleness is the effects of beer. Nippers and I dined earlier today. You see how gentle I am, sir. Shall I go and black his eyes for him? You refer to Bartleby, I suppose. No, not today, Turkey, I replied. Pray put up your fists. I closed the doors again and advanced towards Bartleby. I felt additional incentives tempting me to my fate. I burned to be rebelled against again. I remembered that Bartleby never left the office. Bartleby, said I, Gingernut is away. Step around to the post office, won't you? It is but a 3-minute walk, and see if there's anything for me there. I would prefer not to. You will not? I prefer not. I staggered to my desk and sat there in deep study. My blind inveteracy returned. Was there any other thing in which I could procure myself to be ignominiously repulsed by this lean, penniless wight, my hired clerk? What added thing is there, perfectly reasonable, that he would be sure to refuse to do? Bartleby, No answer. Bartleby! In a louder tone. No answer. Bartleby! Like a very ghost, agreeable to the laws of magical invocation, at the third summons he appeared at the entrance of his hermitage. Go to the next room and tell Nippers to come to me. I prefer not to, he respectfully and slowly said, and then mildly disappeared. Very good, Bartleby, said I. The next morning came. Bartleby, said I, gently calling to him behind the screen. No reply. Bartleby, said I, in a still gentler tone, come here. I am not going to ask you to do anything you would prefer not to do. I simply wish to speak to you. Upon this, he noiselessly slid into view. Will you tell me, Bartleby, where were you born? I would prefer not to. Will you tell me anything about yourself? I would prefer not to. But what reasonable objection can you have to speak to me? I feel friendly towards you. What is your answer, Bartleby? Said I, after waiting a considerable time for a reply, during which his countenance remained immovable. Only there was the faintest conceivable tremor of the white, attenuated mouth. At present, I prefer to give no answer, said he, and retired into his hermitage. The next day I noticed that Bartleby did nothing but stand at his window in his dead-wall reverie. Upon asking him why he did not write, he said that he had decided upon doing no more writing. Why? How now? What next? Exclaimed I. Do no more writing? No more. And what is the reason? Do you not see the reason for yourself? He indifferently replied. I looked steadfastly at him and perceived that his eyes looked dull and glazed. Instantly it occurred to me that his unexampled diligence in copying by his dim window for the first few weeks of his stay with me might have temporarily impaired his vision. I was touched. Still, added days went by. Whether Bartleby's eyes improved or not, I could not say. To all appearance, I thought they did. But when I asked him if they did, he vouchsafed no answer. At all events, he would do no copying. At last, in reply to my urgings, he informed me that he had permanently given up copying. What? Exclaimed I. Suppose your eyes should get entirely well, better than ever before. Would you not copy then? I have given up copying, he said, and slid aside. He remained, as ever, a fixture in my chamber. Nay, if it were possible, he became still more of a fixture than before. What was to be done? He would do nothing in the office. Why should he stay there? Decently as I could, I told Bartleby that in 6 days' time he must unconditionally leave the office. I warned him to take measures in the interval for procuring some other abode. I offered to assist him in this endeavor if he would but take the first step himself. And when you finally quit me, Bartleby, added I shall see that you not go away entirely unprovided. 6 days from this hour, remember. At the expiration of that period, I peeped behind the screen, and lo, Bartleby was there. I buttoned up my coat, balanced myself, and advanced slowly towards him, touching his shoulder, and said, "The time has come. You must quit this place. I am sorry for you. Here is money, but you must go." I would prefer not to, he replied, with his back still towards me. You must! He remained silent. Bartleby, said I owe you $12 on account. Here are 32. The odd 20 are yours. Will you take it? And I handed the bills towards him, but he made no motion. I will leave them here then, putting them under a weight on the table. Then, taking my hat and cane and going towards the door, I tranquilly turned and added, after you have removed your things from the offices, Bartleby, will you, of course, lock the door since everyone is gone for the day but you? And, if you please, slip your key underneath the mat so that I may have it in the morning. I shall not see you again, Bartleby, so goodbye to you. If hereafter in your new place of abode I can be of any service to you, do not fail to advise me by letter. Goodbye, Bartleby, goodbye, and fare you well. Well, as you can imagine, what happens next is he comes back to the office, and of course Bartleby is there, and things get to the point where the lawyer decides to change law offices. He gets an entirely new law office in a different part of town, and then starts to think about, well, what happened to Bartleby? He received a complaint from the new lawyer that there's this weird man hanging around and he won't do any work, so the lawyer is compelled to go back to his old law offices. Going upstairs to my old haunt, there was Bartleby, silently sitting upon the banister at the landing. What are you doing here, Bartleby? Said I. Sitting upon the banister, he mildly replied. I motioned him into the lawyer's room, who then left us. Bartleby, said I, are you aware that you are the cause of great tribulation to me by persisting in occupying the entry after being dismissed from the office? No answer. Now, one of two things must take place. Either you must do something or something must be done to you. Now, what sort of business would you like to engage in? Would you like to re-engage in copying for someone? No, I would prefer not to make any change. Would you like a clerkship in a dry goods store? No, there is too much confinement about that. I would not like a clerkship, but I am not particular. Too much confinement, cried I. Why, you keep yourself confined all the time. I would prefer not to take a clerkship, he rejoined, as if to settle the item once and for all. How would a bartender's business suit you? There is no trying of the eyesight in that. I would not like it at all, though, as I said before, I am not particular. His unwonted wordiness inspirited me. I returned to the charge. Well then, would you like to travel the country collecting bills for the merchants? That would improve your health. No, I would prefer to be doing something else. How then? How about going to Europe as a companion to entertain some young gentleman with your conversation? Not at all. It does not strike me that there is anything definite about that. I like to be stationary, but I am not particular. Stationary you shall be then, I cried, and losing all patience, and for the first time in all my exasperating connection to him, fairly flying into a passion. If you do not go away from these premises before night, I shall feel bound, indeed am bound, to quit the premises myself. I rather absurdly concluded, knowing not with what possible threat to try to threaten him with. His immobility. I rather absurdly concluded, knowing not with what possible threat to try to frighten his immobility into compliance. Despairing of all further efforts, I was leaving him when a final thought occurred to me. one which had not been wholly unindulged before. "Bartleby," said I, in the kindest tone I could assume under such exciting circumstances, "Bartleby, will you go home with me now? Not to my office, but to my dwelling. To remain with me there until we can conclude some convenient arrangement at our leisure. Come, start now, right away. Will you go home with me?" "No, at present I would prefer not to make any change at all." Several days afterwards, I received a note that the poor Scrivener, when told that he must be conducted to jail, he offered not the slightest obstacle, but, in his pale, unmoving way, silently acquiesced. Some of the compassionate and curious bystanders joined the party, and, headed by one of the constables, arm in arm with Bartleby, the silent procession filed its way through the noise, the heat, and the joy of the roaring thoroughfares at noon. The same day I received the note, I went to visit him at the jail. Being under no disgraceful charge, apparently, and quite serene and harmless in all of his ways, they had permitted him to freely wander about in the prison, and especially in the enclosed glass-plated yards thereof. And so I found him there, standing all alone in the quietest of the yards, his face towards a high wall, while all around from the narrow slits of the jail windows, I thought I saw peering out upon him the eyes of murderers and thieves. "Bartleby, I know you," he said without looking around, "and I want nothing to say to you." "It was not I that brought you here, Bartleby," said I, keenly pained at his implied suspicion. "And to you this should be not so vile a place. Nothing reproachful attaches to you by being here. And see, it is not so sad a place as one might think. Look, there is sky, and here is the grass." "I know where I am," he replied, but he would say nothing more, and so I left him. Some few days after this, I again obtained admission to the jail and went through the corridors in quest of Bartleby, but without finding him. I finally saw, "I saw him coming from his cell not long ago," said a turnkey, "but he's been gone. Maybe he's gone to loiter in the yards." So I went in that direction. "Are you looking for the silent man?" said another turnkey, passing towards me. "Yonder he lies, sleeping in the yard there. 'Tis not 20 minutes since I saw him lie down." The yard was entirely quiet. It was not accessible to the common prisoners. The surrounding walls of amazing thickness kept off all sounds behind them. The Egyptian character of the masonry weighed upon me with its gloom, but a soft imprisoned turf grew underfoot. The heart of the eternal pyramids, it seemed, wherein, by some strange magic, through the clefts, grass seed dropped by birds had sprung. Strangely huddled at the base of a wall, his knees drawn up and lying on his side, his head touched the cold stones. I saw the wasted Bartleby, but nothing stirred. I paused and went up close to him, stooped there, and saw his dim eyes were open. Otherwise, he seemed profoundly sleeping. Something prompted me to touch him. I felt his hand when a tingling shiver ran down my arm and down my spine to my feet. The round face of the grubman peered upon me. His dinner's ready. Won't he dine today either? Or does he live without dining? Lives without dining, said I, and closed his eyes. He's asleep, ain't he? With kings and counselors, murmured I. Bartleby was dead. There would seem little need for proceeding further upon this history. Imagination will readily supply the meager recital of poor Bartleby's interment. But before parting with the reader, let me say that if this little narrative has sufficiently interested him to reawaken curiosity as to who Bartleby was and what manner of life he led prior to the present narrator's making his acquaintance, I can only reply that in such curiosity I fully share, but am wholly unable to gratify it. Yet here I hardly know whether I should divulge this one little item of rumor which has come to my ear a few months after the Scrivener's decease. Upon what basis it is rested I could never ascertain, but hints how true it is I cannot now tell. But inasmuch as this vague report has not been without a certain suggestive interest to me, however sad, it may prove the same with some others, and so I will briefly mention it. The report was this: that Bartleby had been a subordinate clerk in the dead letter office at Washington, D.C., from which he had been suddenly removed by a change of the administration. When I think over this rumor, hardly can I express the emotions which seize me. Dead letters. Wow. Does that not sound like dead men? Imagine, if you will, a man by nature and misfortune prone to a pallid hopelessness. Can any business seem more fitted to heighten it than that of continually handling these dead letters and assorting them for the flames? For by the cartload they are annually burned, sometimes from without, the folded paper, the pale clerk takes a ring. The finger it was meant for perhaps moulders in the grave. A banknote sent in swiftest charity. He, whom it would relieve, neither eats nor hungers anymore. Pardon for those who died despairing, hope for those who died unhoping, good tidings for those who died stifled by unrelieved calamities. On the errands of life, those letters sped towards death. Oh, Bartleby, oh, humanity.